everyone, it's Office Hours Live. Thanks for joining. Can you guys hear me? Can you pop a thumbs up or a yes into the live chat if you can hear me okay? Anyone? I just want to make sure you can hear me, and I think you can. I'm just going to start talking. Anyway, so thanks for joining me. I'm Kamara Toffolo. For those of you who don't know, and I appreciate that you've joined me here today on the very first session of Office Hours on YouTube Live. So, oh, good. Thank you, Vinay. I appreciate that. So we are going to spend a good chunk of this session covering off a lot of lingering questions that I didn't have a chance to get to last week when I was on a webinar hosted by Amy Davies at First 30, as well as when I was on LinkedIn News with Andrew Seaman. Both amazing sessions, lots of great questions, so many I couldn't get to them. So we're going to cover those off today. And then we'll also take some live questions as well in the chat. So I'll let you know when I'm ready for those. I am going to be watching the chat as well as we go through this. But just to give you an idea of the number of questions, I have a very official clipboard here with tons of questions. This is just my backup. Usually I don't print anything, but yeah, so we've got about 30 questions or so to get through first. We're going to start with ATSs, then we're going to get into some resume formatting questions, and then some other resume specific questions, as well as some actual job search strategy questions at the end, and then I'll take your live questions. So let's jump into it. We're at 2:01, so I said we start this at 2. Here we go. So first I want to talk about some ATS questions. There's a lot of misconceptions that are floating around out there about ATSs. It really bothers me how much kind of fear mongering there is about applicant tracking systems or ATSs. Hi, Sahil, thanks for joining. Yeah, it really bothers me that there's a lot of fear mongering by supposed thought leaders, particularly on LinkedIn. There's really nothing to be fearful of when it comes to the ATS or the applicant tracking system. It's supposed to make lives easier for the recruiters and the people doing hiring. And oftentimes I'm hearing from recruiters that despite having an applicant tracking system in place, they're not actually using all of the features, and they go through every single resume that comes in anyway. So, and also just to clear something up, ATSs, applicant tracking systems, are not auto-rejecting your applications. That's simply not happening unless there's something called a, oh, the name escapes me. Basically a showstopper type question where it's basically like things like, can this person work in the US? Can this person work in Canada? And if that happens, then there will be a type of rejection, but your resume itself is not getting rejected. So Corrine and Rachel during the First 30 webinar asked me, can resumes actually handle hyperlinks? Because I had recommended hyperlinking your email address and your LinkedIn profile URL when you submit your resume. And I was pretty confident that there would be no issues with hyperlinks, but I wanted to be absolutely crystal clear on this. So I surveyed my recruiter friends on Twitter, and they confirmed that hyperlinks have no impact on whether the ATS ATS has, what I should say is ATS has no problem with hyperlinks. So when you are including hyperlinks, make sure that you include the full text of a link. So your full email address, your full LinkedIn URL, and that way you can make sure that that's passing through on the ATS. But the ATS is not going to stop your resume from getting through because of a hyperlink. So you can stop worrying about that. I know a lot of people were wondering about that. Okay, Inga asked, and Prashant had a follow-up question about font sizes with regard to ATSs. There is no minimum font size. The ATS doesn't care about font size. Font size is something you need to pay attention to for the human reader. You may need to make sure that your resume can be read by the human reader, because humans make hiring decisions. So the ATS doesn't care about your font size, but your font size is important to make sure it can be read by an actual human, right? So I do recommend an 11-point font. If you do have a 10-point font, some fonts will behave okay, are big enough. And Jude, I see you here. Hello, Jude. Jude had a great post on LinkedIn recently where she compared the different fonts and their sizes and how they actually appear. So Jude, if you have a link to that post that you made on LinkedIn, I would love it if you could pop it in the chat so people can see that work you did on comparing font sizes. So, because different fonts look different on resumes, but the ATS is not going to reject your resume based on a font size. So don't worry about that either. Just make sure you're being mindful of the human reader. Okay, so there was a question from Monica about whether pie charts are okay in a resume. You can put them in, but the ATS doesn't really like images. And when I say doesn't really like, it just can't digest it. Again, it's not going to reject your resume because you put an image in there. If you are submitting an email application, a pie chart is fine in there. So don't worry about that. Just the ATS isn't going to take a look at it, but it will still pass your resume through. And then there was questions around sending resumes as PDF or doc, like Word doc. I do recommend submitting your resume when you're applying online as a Word document. It's typically not going to make or break your application by submitting it as a PDF, but Word is kind of the old standby. So I do recommend using Microsoft Word to submit your applications. If you are emailing somebody your resume, you can email them a PDF version. Thanks, Jude. I appreciate that. I think a lot of people will have a lot to learn from your font comparison. Okay. And then Prashant was asking about including a photograph. There are some job markets where a photograph is expected in your resume, so a headshot. North American resumes, we don't want to include a headshot, but some other markets, international markets, would like to see this. Again, because it's an image, the ATS just isn't going to look at it. Your resume is still going to get through though. So include it if it's an expectation in your market. And don't include it if it's not an expectation in your market, like the America or Canada. Okay, and Prashant also asked about column-based structures of resumes. So sometimes, especially if you're on Canva or Pinterest, you'll see these really pretty resumes that have used kind of multiple panels to separate information. That's the one thing that does not play well, or one of the things that does not play well with the applicant tracking systems. Applicant tracking systems read from right to left, or I'm sorry, left to right. So you want to try and use the entire width of the page. So that is really what will help your resume get read by the ATS. Those columns, it's called a multi-panel resume. They look nice. They behave horribly with the ATS. So be very careful when you use those. If you're using a resume that you're printing off, let's say, and taking to a networking event, that's okay. But for an actual online application, please do not use a multi-panel resume. Okay, so Becky was wondering how to tailor her resume for something that's more junior. She has 20 years of work experience, but she's targeting roles that only need 10. So when you're applying for a job that is more junior to your career level, I do not recommend watering down your experience. That's what a lot of people go for, is like dumbing it down, watering it down. I really don't recommend doing that because you could go too far the other direction. What I do recommend is being very clear on what's expected of the ideal candidate, and then the accomplishments you share in your resume all stress your experience with what they're actually looking for. So you don't have to make yourself seem more junior. You just need to make sure that you're sharing things that are relevant to the target job. Okay, and just to mention again, I'm going to be taking other questions at the end after I get through all of these. I'm a third of the way through, so we're making good time. So I'll be letting you know when I can take your questions in the live chat. Okay. Anwar asked, if I'm wanting to make a career change, what's the best format of a resume? There's no particular format that is specific to career changing. What is specific to career changing is making sure that the accomplishments you share are relevant to that new career direction that you're going for. Inga said, said and asked, I like Google Docs. Is this okay to use instead of Microsoft Word? It is okay to build your resume in Google Docs first, but you must save it as a Word document. You're not going to be able to submit it as a Google Doc, and even if that's an option, I don't recommend it. By and large, from what I've heard from recruiters, they want to see your resume in Word or PDF in some cases. Google Docs, it does not play well in terms of formatting. If you take something that you built in Word and you put it onto Google Docs and convert it into a Google Doc, you'll see that things change considerably. So I don't recommend using Google Docs typically, but if you don't have any other options, go ahead and use it. Just make sure that you save your resume in Word version or download it in Word version before using it. Prashant asked about Trebuchet MS font in a resume with 8.5 size. Can I use that? I tested this and no, sir, you cannot use that. It is way too small. I would need a microscope or to zoom in at 180% to actually see it. It's too small. Please always try and go for no smaller, like general rule of thumb is no smaller than 10-point font is what I would say. But try and aim for 11-point if you can. Okay. Matt asked about the opening paragraph in the professional summary. So you've got your contact information at the top, or name, title, contact information, then you open with a professional summary. How long should it be? And are soft skills appropriate for this section? I would say a 4-line paragraph tops. Like, you want to keep this brief. You want to hit the reader quickly with some really important information about you. And yes, you can add soft skills or soft skill attributes into that paragraph as well. I would say that from a soft skills perspective, you'd want to stress leadership and communication skills. Those are 2 skills, soft skills, that would play well in that paragraph. So let's get into professional experience. We've got quite a few questions here about professional experience. So Nalita asked, my accomplishments are confidential because they are IT related and are brought up during an interview. I work with databases and reporting, so I bring up examples during an interview. I'm listing skills per company in LinkedIn, but I'm not getting interviews. What should I do differently? Okay, so we need to approach resumes and LinkedIn in different ways. Your resume is supposed to be a confidential document. So you have more ability to share more confidential things in your resume. LinkedIn is a very public forum. So I would caution you from displaying anything or sharing any information that may be considered private or confidential. For IT-related accomplishments, even if you feel like you need to keep things a little more confidential on your resume, I would recommend not adding any client names if you're concerned about privacy. Do not add any like really strong specifics other than the tech you used, and preferably I would like or encourage you to include scope of projects, size of projects, size of budgets if you can. But the first thing I would cut if confidentiality is a concern is client name. I would just not include that at all. And I certainly wouldn't include that on LinkedIn. And I'm listing skills per company in LinkedIn, but I'm not getting interviews. That's because you're not telling enough of a story. You can't just list skills and assume that people are going to come to you. You, first of all, need to tell more of a story in your LinkedIn profile. It needs to be compelling. It needs to be interesting. It needs to be something that people want to read to encourage them to actually reach out to you. but you also have to do your own reaching out. You also have to be very active in your own networking. Jason said, I lost my dad. I'm so sorry, Jason. And I did a job in a different industry for 4 months. Okay. I have 3 different backgrounds now. Will I look like a job hopper? Do I have to explain that my dad passed away? No, you don't have to explain that your dad passed away unless you took time off work to be his caregiver. In which case I would say that you could write a one-liner that indicates that you took a leave of absence to care for a family member. You could certainly say that. In terms of the different industries, it does not really matter if you are in different industries, different jobs. What you always need to do is be very clear first on what you're targeting as your target job to make sure that the accomplishments you share in your resume relate back to that direction. So make it relevant. Again, always make it relevant to the reader, relevant to the target job, relevant to the target company. And then the job hopping really won't affect you that much. Okay, so Arash asked about guidelines for writing a consultant's resume, where you might have 10 projects that are all relevant to a role. Expanding on each takes too much space, but if you only expand on a couple, that's not providing enough detail. So any tips on managing that? I would not share every single project necessarily unless I did have the room. What I would probably do is prioritize my top 3 or 4 projects. And when I'm sharing the projects that I did as a consultant, I am stressing project scope, project size, like put a dollar figure on it, and what you enabled your client to do. As consultants, we don't necessarily have results after the fact because it's like, here, client, here's my recommendations and advice. Go ahead, implement it. And so you just kind of, here you go, and then you leave. That's kind of how consulting engagements work. And so if that's the case, then it's really important to stress what you enabled the client to do with your recommendations or your work. Okay. Corinne said, what if your job titles don't align with the job that you're applying to, but you have the skills and experience they're looking for? So I do take some creative license in titles when I'm writing resumes. I do rename titles to the industry standard title because there's a lot of times that companies think they're being cute and funny and they give their employees weird titles like Chief Client Happiness Officer. Like, what the hell is that? That's really, really not something that makes any sense at all. So I do bring it back to the industry standard role title, but then I'll add some clarity for transparency purposes in the opening paragraph where I talk about that role. And I'll say something like, under the official title of Chief Client Happiness Officer, and then I'll get into the context of the role just to make sure we're covering all of our bases there. All right, and I do see some questions coming up. I'm going to get to them. I think we've got about 10 more questions or so. Okay, Gigi mentioned, I was at a job for 16 years. How do I make that look like a good thing and not like I was unmotivated? Okay, so 16 years at one job isn't necessarily a bad thing. I would really bring out kind of the different categories of accomplishments to show kind of like a progression of developing the breadth of your skills, if that makes sense, or the breadth of your responsibilities. So the title may have stayed the same, but I bet you were given more responsibility and more responsibility and more and so on. And so making sure you bring that out is really important. And I think that will solve your problem of thinking you might look unmotivated, because I don't think you really will. There are a lot of people who have long tenures at the same job or long tenures at the same company. And on that point, if you have a long tenure at one company, but multiple roles, you want to make sure that you're listing each of those roles and highlighting the accomplishments from each of those roles to show the progression. Sadipta said, actually, this was a LinkedIn question. Sadipta said, I want to make a re-entry into corporates tech, but I'm currently a teacher. How do I arrange my resume so that I can accommodate the career gap? I think what you mean by career gap is the gap out of tech, where you kind of took a detour into teaching. Again, with the teaching, you want to make the accomplishments you share relevant to the tech role that you want to go into. So I would need a little more information on that tech role, because there could very well be a lot of teaching aspects in it, or coaching, depending on what that tech role is. So again, thinking to yourself, as a teacher, what did I do that would be relevant to my next role or future role going back to tech? But you're also going to want to make sure that you do bring forward your previous accomplishments in tech. So make sure you're properly highlighting those as well. Okay, we're moving along. This is good. All right. So now we're going to get into some education questions. We just have a couple. And they're both from Linda. So Linda asked, how do you handle taking some college courses but not completing a degree? Okay, so we definitely need to be very transparent about not having a degree. We never want to show that we have a degree or say we have a degree when we didn't complete it. So instead of putting, say, Bachelor of Arts in English, let's say, instead we want to say coursework in English. That's it. Because we did not get the degree, and we need to make that quite clear. So coursework in whatever your major, minor, or specialty was. And then put the school name. And she also asked, should we include training courses we've completed on LinkedIn that may be relevant to the role? Absolutely. You can certainly put that in your education section, making it education and professional development, let's say, as the subheader. And you can certainly mention those relevant courses. You had mentioned Tableau, Excel. Those are really good ones to mention. Time management, I'd probably leave that off. It's expected as experienced professionals that we can manage our time, right? So I'd probably avoid talking about time management. Okay. All right. So now we're going to get into like some following up questions, networking questions, hiring practices questions. So Aisha asked, do you have any tips for understanding the new normal workplace? That is a good question. So things are changing, and things are changing fast, especially with COVID. My predictions are we're going to see, and we already are seeing, a huge move to remote work. We're going to see even more of that. And we're going to see more dispersed teams, and just, yeah, a lot of that, a lot of not going into the office. That's my prediction. So with that said, my advice for that is to be super, super proficient at tech. Tech will be the thing that enables you to do your work and do your work well. Be very familiar with the tech that's you're expected to be proficient in for your target roles. Just always keep up on tech. Tech is a big one. So always be working on your tech skills. Sarah asked, what is an appropriate amount of time to follow up with an employer if you haven't heard back? I would give them a week after you apply, or a week after an interview. But if you do interview, you're sending them a thank you note within 24 hours. So again, a week between actual follow-ups, and I would follow up a few times. Okay. All right. So Abraham has a big question here. So I've heard that companies in the US are hesitant to hire people who've worked for foreign companies overseas for long periods, especially if it's a managerial position in sales or operations. Therefore, it's advised that these people should downplay their resumes to get into a lesser position than prove themselves moving forward. What do you think about this, and how should we write our resumes to not let employers think that this person is overqualified? Okay, so I would say that that US companies or Canadian companies are not, as a general rule, hesitant to hire people with international experience. There are many companies that highly value international experience, particularly if those companies are in international markets. If they want someone who has the ability to work cross-culturally, This is also very important. So I would not worry about having international experience. So we don't want to downplay our work experience. You don't necessarily have to enter at a more junior role. I would still recommend that you go forward and move towards your target role. Again, you're really leaning on your accomplishments and making that international work experience relevant to the US or Canadian market, so that you're really highlighting the value that you can bring to that future employer. Again, relevant information that resonates and that just generally makes sense to that target employer. So also, if it's an international market, you're going to want to avoid or make sure that you're properly translating anything that might be in a different language, like names of other companies or names of industries, names of sectors, and just, again, make it make sense. That's what it all comes down to, make it make sense. Rose said, I have had many interviews. However, the response that I'm getting is, we decided to select someone else, or you're not a good fit. I am 60 and healthy. What am I doing wrong? Okay, so you're doing a lot right. I can tell you that. You are getting interviews, which is sometimes a challenge, or often a challenge. So you're getting interviews. So way to go. You did that. And so you're getting responses of, we decided to go with someone else. I'm not ready to say that this is necessarily an age thing. What it might sound like is, I would be not worried necessarily, but I would get a second point of view on how you approach interviews. So you could work with an interview coach. I'm not an interview coach, but you could work with an interview coach and get kind of that objective point of view on how you come across in interviews. So controlling what you can control in how you interview is a good place to start. And if it is an age thing and maybe a tenure thing, it's possible that your salary range is outside the budget of the employer. So they should be forthright with that if they can be. They can't always be, but that could be the reason as well. But I would start again with what you can control, and that's how you show up in interviews. Beth said, I've gone to college and graduated. How do I get my first job when I have no experience? Okay, so you need to kind of, well, first of all, continue applying for jobs. And what you can do in the meantime as you're job searching is start to accumulate unofficial work experience, volunteering, offering to be an intern, taking on your own self-directed projects to kind of like create a body of work to showcase your skill in the career direction that you're going for. All of that stuff counts. So just get creative with accumulating unofficial work experience. Okay, Jim said, how do I network in my hometown, to which I want to return after 20 years away? LinkedIn is great. So I would start with LinkedIn and reach out to people that were in my old network and just kind of refresh those relationships. I would reach out to people in my alumni network and refresh those relationships. I wouldn't start from scratch necessarily. I would go back to the people I had already met and yeah, just get back in touch and warm up those old relationships. Jason asked me what headset I'm using. Looks nice, thank you. I'm borrowing it from my husband. It's a Plantronics headset, and yeah, I'm glad you like it. Thank you. Okay, one thing I want to address before I take your questions in the chat is I want to talk about kind of the recruiter job seeker relationship. So a lot of job seekers think I'm a recruiter. I am not. And so they reach out to me as though I can help them get a job as a recruiter. And I see a lot of job seekers reaching out to recruiters, asking them to get them jobs. That's not the best use of your time, and it's kind of a waste of time for the recruiter too. They can help you sometimes if they have something that they can fill, but you need to be mindful of the fact that recruiters work for their clients. Of course, the good recruiters want to make a job seeker's experience a good one, and they do their absolute best to make that happen. But you need to make sure that you understand that, to put it simply, they don't owe you a job. So you should refrain from bashing recruiters on LinkedIn or Twitter or any social media for that matter. That you should, make it super easy for a recruiter to place you in a job if you think that they are in your industry or space where there might be an opportunity. You should treat them like a partner, but with the understanding, again, they don't owe you anything. They owe their clients to find the best possible people to fill the roles that are open. So it's when I see people saying things like, I'm working with a recruiter now, or I'm trying to find a recruiter to work with. The recruiter is not someone that you need to go find to work with. The recruiter is working with the client, and you might fit the profile that they're looking for a job that is open, but you can't work with the recruiter and think they're going to be your job agent. It doesn't work that way. So just give recruiters an easier time if you can, please. They're doing the best that they can, especially now. It's a crazy time for them, and don't misconstrue the relationship and think that they're working for you. They are not. They're working for their clients, which are the companies, the employers. So make it easy for the recruiter to put you forward as a recommendation for a possible job. But again, the recruiter doesn't work for you. And that's all I wanted to say on that matter. I wanted to clear that up. All right. So let's take a look at some of these questions here. All right, let's see. Okay, Joe, I have found that different versions of Word changes the formatting, which distorts my resume. Is PDF device and version agnostic? I mean, you can use PDF to retain the integrity of your formatting. PDF is okay. Most ATSs can read PDF. I still recommend Word because of how much easier it is for ATSs to read Word. But if the application site accepts PDF, then you can submit your resume as a PDF. Okay, Jude, for that post, your excellent font post, when you look at your post on LinkedIn and you look at it on desktop, there should be like an arrow close to the top right-hand corner of the post where I think you can click it and it drops down and it says share. There could also be a couple dots that say share, and then you just copy the link. And I'll see if I can grab that later myself, and I'll put it into the comments in the video recording. I have a time lapse on my resume due to an illness. I was knocked out of my life for about 2 years. I'm sorry. I'm never sure how to list that on my resume. What would you recommend? I would recommend just putting a short one-liner that says took personal leave, and then just leave it at that. And that should cover it. Okay, Vinay, is it okay if we personally submit our resume to an organization whenever they have an opening? I mean, you could, but I don't think that's the best use of your time. Instead, I would recommend that you network with the people at that organization that you're targeting instead. Always getting to know people on the inside will serve you well. Nigel, I've heard jobs come from job boards, recruiters in the hidden market in the ratio of 10, 20, 70. Do you think this is about right? And should job seekers use their time according to this ratio? The longer I'm in this space, the less I'm realizing that hidden job markets are such a thing. hidden job markets are satisfied, or hidden job markets are tapped into by networking, but you still have to apply for a job. So I still think that applying online is worthy of your time, but when you are applying online, you should make sure that you're applying in a targeted way. You're applying to the jobs that you actually want. So you're not spraying and praying, which is like sending your resume everywhere and thinking that you're going to get a call back. Job searching is not a numbers game. It is a targeted, focused strategy. And so only applying to those jobs for which you're qualified and you want to work for, that is really the key. So that ratio, I can't really speak to it. It's not really something that I've heard. But again, your job search strategy is a multi-pronged approach. Submitting applications online as well as networking. Is it ever appropriate to ask the recruiter if hiring for the position was put on hold? I went through 5 rounds of interviews for a position, and 3.5 weeks later, I got a generic email. Thank you. You could ask them outright if it was put on hold, but I wouldn't ask them outright if that was the case. I would just make sure I'm following up on that application, because there are so many reasons that a job might be put, or a search might be put on hold, it might be canceled, especially now with COVID and the layoffs. Hiring freezes are happening a lot. There's just so little insight that you can gain as a job seeker. And there's also limited insight a recruiter can gain in some cases. And also they're very limited on what they can tell you. So you could ask them, but I would more so just spend your time messaging them with kind of a reiteration of why you're a fit for that job, why you're so excited about that job, rather than like, hey, is this put on hold? I would just spend your time reminding them of why you're the best candidate for that job. Do you recommend using resume scan tools to get a rating like JobScan? I'm frustrated about being dinged for not exact word matches. I don't want to just pepper the resume with keywords for ATS. Yes, you can use JobScan, but keywords are only one component of a resume. We also need to make sure that the resume reads well to the human. So you're not like overwhelming a reader with a huge amount of content squished into your resume. You're also not inundating them with irrelevant information. So keywords, heavy hitting keyword sections are your skills section on your resume, as well as so integrating some keywords into your professional experience as well. So yes, you could use JobScan. That can give you an objective view on how well you've integrated keywords. But keywords, again, are one component, not everything when it comes to the resume. Okay, I'm weaving keywords into my experience, but the wording might be collaborative versus collaborate, and I get dinged. How have you confirmed that's happening, Barb? Because I'm not sure that necessarily that would happen. In fact, I would use, say, as a skill collaboration, but I don't think that would get dinged. So if you have some a story on how you got dinged on that, I'd love to know. Sahil, is it okay to ask for a referral more than one time in my LinkedIn network? Yes. Yes, it is. You can certainly follow up. People are busy, and so they might not notice your message. So you can certainly follow up for a referral, but you need to make it incredibly easy for someone to put you in front of someone else or to connect you with someone else. So you need to give them the why. You need to basically tell them, you know, the why and what value you can bring to the person to whom you want them to introduce you. So again, make it super easy. Job scan will show collaborate on the job description, not showing on my resume. Yeah, I mean, you can certainly. I just in real life, I just don't think that is going to affect the success of your job application, Barb. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, is that I'm learning more and more and more that recruiters aren't actually using the ATS as we think they are. They're going through every single job application that comes in, because what they're worried about is that there's a flaw in the ATS, which there very often is, and that the ATS isn't, say, prioritizing or properly filing applications for them, and they don't want to reduce their pool of qualified job seekers. So I wouldn't worry about something that minute. Collaborative. Of course, job scan can only match based on what's being scanned, but I really don't think that something like that is going to affect you. Kathy, what advice do you have for someone in nearly 60s looking for advice? I have good experience, but I am willing to learn new technology and innovation. How can you convey that? What would you like to target, Kathy, as your next job? Can you let me know in the chat? And I'll come back to you. Samita, do companies wait till the end date of the posting to start interviewing the candidates? Is there any way to know whether the interviews are being conducted for the position? I do not know, and there's no way to actually find out unless the recruiter or the person in HR or talent acquisition wants to tell you that information. So yeah, I don't know if that's the case. I would highly doubt that's the case, going back to what I just said about ATSs. Recruiters want to have a good pool of possible candidates for a job. So I doubt very much that they're going to close the door before the deadline happens. So because they don't want to lose out on maybe that unicorn, you know? So I would doubt very much that they're gonna not wait till the end, but they might start interviews. But I think that they will still be, I'm confident they'd still be reviewing resumes. But whether to know if the interviews are in progress or not, that's very hard to find out. Kathy, how far back do you put work history? Does it look like you were trying to hide something? How do employers look at older workers generally? I can't speak to how employers look at older workers generally, because every company's needs are different. How far back do you put work history? It really depends. For me, I might cut off work history at about 15 years for a client, but if there's relevant early work experience, I'm going to bring that forward. And I'm also going to mention that in like an early career section. I might not attach a date to it. Barb, yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, the ATS is so feared, and there's no reason for it to be feared so much. But I think what the cause of this is because there's a lot of misinformation going around out there, and there's a lot of people trying to sell stuff that are creating this fear because they want you to go to them to buy their course, to buy their resume writing package. I don't see the point in that. I mean, I'm not, people don't come to me because I'm like a rock star at navigating the ATS. They come to me because I'm good at writing resumes. So again, you're writing for the human reader because human readers make the hiring decisions, but of course you want to complement that with playing well with the ATS. But again, we're prioritizing a well-written resume, not something that's going to beat the bots. Kathy, marketing communications. Okay, many roles are digital. I have minimal experience, but trying to learn more. Okay, so I'm just going to scroll up to what your first question was. Okay, got it. Okay, any advice? You have good experience, but willing to learn new technology. And that's exactly what I would focus on, Kathy. I would really focus on building up your skills in tech. That is really, really important. So self-study on LinkedIn, on Coursera, on Udemy, whatever, wherever you want to self-study. I would definitely take that on to make sure that you have at least the learned skills, maybe not the applied skills, but the learned skills, so that you can position yourself for these more innovative roles, but also bringing forward your traditional strength in marketing communications, because there's a lot of, in marketing communications, there's a lot of standards, a lot of approaches that really stand the test of time. Even though they might seem old, they are kind of the principles, the theories that will apply for years and years and years indefinitely. We just maybe use different tools, and that's where the digital tools come in, the technology. So definitely learn those, get those into your toolbox, and that would be my advice for that. All right. Any other questions before we wrap up? I know we went through a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. All right. Did I miss anyone's questions? I don't think so. I think we're covered. Anyway. All right. So I'm going to end this here. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. This will be a regular occurrence. Whether it will be at this time on Saturdays, I don't know. But this will be a regular occurrence. This office hours on YouTube Live, because it's so easy to go live. And also, this is recorded and available on my channel indefinitely. So you can revisit this anytime. And yeah, it's great to see everyone here. And oh, sorry, Jude. I think I missed that that note about underlining in the ATS. Yes, I've never seen any problems with underlining with the ATS. Were there any other ATS questions? Because I think that this is really like confusing. You know what? There's one thing I wanted to go over ATS related. Let's see here. Let's see if I can bring this up. I will only be able to view this, but I do want to address this. Okay, so there was kind of a list, a 16-point list of ATS compliant or non-compliant aspects. And this was sent to me, and I was asked to weigh in on this. And so I'm just going to go through this list, and I'm going to tell you if I agree with this or not. So it says for ATS compliant resume, avoid or remove graphics. I agree with that. Icons, I agree with that. Symbols, agreed. Text boxes, yes. Tables, yes, although that's not going to make or break your resume. Graphs, yes. Underlines, no, as we've already clarified. Horizontal lines, no. Long vertical lines, no. These do not affect your how well your resume goes through the ATS. Side panels, yes, because that's not because of well, it is because of ATS. The multi-panel resume that I was referring to, we don't want to use that. Dark background colors, never heard of that as a problem. Italics, nope, not a problem. Quotation marks, nope, not a problem. Hyperlinks, nope, not a problem. Photos, yeah, you can take those out. Font size is less than 11 points, not a problem. Okay, so graphics, icons, symbols, text boxes, graphs, photos. So yes, for the ATS, you can remove those, but again, having those in your resume is not going to reject, or is not going to have the ATS reject your resume. So this is where that fear comes in. Just like giving the impression that you're doomed because you include these things. you're not doomed because you include those things. They're just not going to be digested by the ATS. It's going to basically be those aspects of your resume will be ignored, and then it will move on and read the rest of your resume. The one thing I do want to caution is text boxes. Those are a common offender in resumes. And the problem there is that people often put very important information in text boxes. Text boxes can't be read by the ATS. So again, a rejection isn't happening, but if you have important information in a text box, that's not getting through the ATS. So your resume is looking incomplete, essentially. So that's the one thing that worries me the most in this list is text boxes. Really, text boxes are the only thing that I really want you to absolutely avoid on your resume. But the other stuff, like the font size, again, that's not a thing. Hyperlinks, not a thing. So there's a lot of stuff in this list that's just not going to affect you in any way, shape, or form. Okay, checking your questions. Oh, thank you, Vinay. Kathy, you can use vertical bullets as shifts from what I see. I'm not sure what a vertical bullet is, or what you're referring to. Lori, 1 page or 2 pages for 20 plus years of experience. Is a 2-page resume okay? Absolutely, a 2-page resume is okay. Please use a 2-page resume for 20 years of work experience. Otherwise, you are going to have a jam-packed 1-page resume, or you're going to be cutting stuff that's important. All right. So, Jude, you found the link. That is great. Thank you. So again, Jude had created a great post on LinkedIn that compared different fonts at different sizes. And it's really, really neat to see. Okay, Kathy, bullets set up in columns. Bullets set up in columns are fine, but you don't want to use a multi-column resume, like a multi-panel resume. Where you see those most commonly are the resume templates on Canva, the resume templates on Pinterest, multi-panels, like 2 huge columns with all the information in columns. That's no good. ATSs can't read that properly. Okay, great. So with that, we will wrap up now. And thank you everybody for joining me today. Again, this is going to be a regular thing. And I hope to see you in the next one. I'll let you know by my email list if you haven't signed up for that. I'll put that in the description of this video later. And I hope you guys have a great Saturday. All the best to you. Thanks so much. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, S. Keach. Thanks, Lori. Thank you, Nigel. Thanks, everyone. And Jude, I didn't see that link, but I'm going to go grab it myself and throw it in the comments to this video when it's done rendering. Thanks, everyone. Take care.